I'm going to say before we get started, my pitch is not very elaborate because I think this movie is not very elaborate in general. Rather than just fully rewrite the movie, I'm mostly just going to kvetch and say the things that I think should have been better. I think the movie is a lot of wasted potential. It has a great cast, decent camera work, but the color correction is ass, and there is no story.
So much potential. There were parts in the story that I just wondered what would have happened if they were different, if it had gone differently.
Central question of the show.
Welcome to Certain POV's Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today, we are pulling the sword out of the earth and unlocking a movie that I saw in theaters and then kind of forgot about, frankly, until we were discussing what movies to do. Today, we are talking about the 2004 Clive Owen-led King Arthur movie. And to have that conversation, we are joined by Lauren Carter.
Hi. Thanks for having me, guys. Geez, it's been a while since we've seen each other. 17 years ago?
Yeah, it was like 2007, 17 years, exactly.
That's been I didn't realize, I thought that was yesterday. Go on.
Right, I know. It's someone said 30 years ago, and I thought they meant the 70s, and then I realized it meant 1994.
Yeah. Ugh.
Lauren and I used to do, Lauren is still an actress, and I used to act, and we did a project called Trenches back in the day, which was a sci-fi film that never was released as far as I remember. Or if it was like in some sort of abbreviated form. But that was back in the day of me being an actor around the DC area. We have stayed in touch in social media world. It's fun that these random connections can still come back around and still be people that we enjoy interacting with and chatting. And I'm so glad that you're here and that we're actually talking again for the first time in forever.
Yes, I know. And not on social media, reacting to stories or posts or whatever. It's so cool. Trenches was definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of heart reacts between the two of us.
Yes, Trenches was a fun set, and it was a fun time. And so this is cool to be talking again and be talking about movies.
Yeah. So we're talking about the King Arthur movie from 2004. I saw this in theaters. What about the two of you?
I watched it for this podcast. I listened to the critics, and I did not go to see this film at all. Because this movie was pretty badly panned, and I was like, nope, I'm not spending my money on that. The side effect of that is, and this happens a lot when I do that, I watch the movie and I'm like, oh, that's not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. So this was a lot less. Yeah, you built it
up in your mind.
Right, my bar was really low when I started it, and it wasn't the worst experience of my life. So it gets that.
Yeah, I think there are definitely pros and cons for us to go into on this movie. Lauren, how about you?
I saw it just at home, and I had really high expectations because, all the actors are amazing, and the cinematography in the trailers looked beautiful, and it's supposed to be this epic story, and it is. So for me, I saw it at home. There are just times where I was like, interesting. Okay, I wonder what would happen if the story was different here and there. And so I think that was just my main question about the movie is how could it have been different if the story here had gone differently?
Yeah, if it had more of a story.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So rewatching it last night, I watched it a couple weeks ago and then had to rewatch it, but it occurred to me that this is the Jon Snow arc from Game of Thrones, except not being subverted in any way. We've got a knight on the wall, and I realize that Jon Snow and the wall in Game of Thrones are based on Hadrian's Wall, but we've got a knight on the wall who has to range out into the wilderness beyond and deal with the woads, the wildlings. Again, all of this is based on the Roman stuff anyway, so that's not that surprising. And then it's but the bigger threat is this thing coming from the north. In the case of Game of Thrones, it's the White Walkers, and it's the Saxons, who might as well just be monsters because they are just cartoonishly evil.
They are very evil, yes.
So there's that comparison, but it's a fairly straightforward movie. I would also draw a comparison with Troy. This came right on the heels of Troy, and it's doing the same kind of thing. It is doing we're going to talk about some big mythological, legendary kind of story, and we are going to here's the real version of it. We're going to do a 13th Warrior, effectively. in this case doing King Arthur instead of 13th Warrior doing Beowulf, or Troy doing the Iliad. Take those differences for what you will. I think that the difference between those works and this, and where this movie kind of stumbles, is that those works are taking an established story and then kind of just stripping the supernatural elements out of it, versus this one is taking a lot of stuff, like it's more lore than specifically one single story, and then stripping actually most of the story elements out. We don't get the key dynamics between pretty much any of the characters that are part of like the Arthurian lore. We don't have the affair of Lancelot and Guinevere. We don't have the individual knights' stories. Like, they make references to them, but those are more kind of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen style, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We reference Gawain's woman, like, without actually like doing like an adaptation of that story. It's just like, here's kind of a broad concept of it, which should be my jam in some regards. Like, I really do love those kind of like deconstructions, and I do rather like adding Roman tapestry to everything, but
right. Yeah, you do.
yeah. But I think that the movie doesn't quite stick the landing, and because there's a lot of aesthetic that I really like, which comes from having good costuming. It has good, cinematography, generally speaking. It has a great cast, but then the actual, why does anything happen, doesn't make sense in the majority of this movie.
Yeah, I
mean, I don't mind that they get rid of the love affair. I actually think that it's a little more interesting to me to have like Arthur and Lancelot's big difference in just like how they view like their faith. And it is interesting to have Arthur kind of be in this position of power because he is part Roman and he's part of the establishment, and have his knights actually still respect him, even though technically they are slaves to Rome, because they're contracted out. And I thought that was a little more of an interesting dynamic than just a love affair. And like, don't get me wrong, like I love the original story and I love the epic poem and all of that stuff. But I always kind of like, really, that's it? Like it's gonna be love that ruins all of this. It's gonna be like in search of sexual delight. So I don't know. I found that a little more interesting. It's not as pronounced. It's done in such a kind of subtle way in the film that I don't think that it's like really drawn out. But I actually found it really interesting because it is a deviation from what you get. And there's so many King Arthur movies. There's so many.
That's true.
They actually didn't bother me. And I actually liked the camaraderie that he had with his table, and the fact that he set them free and he was going to fight the battle on his own, and that they used their freedom to come back for him because there is more of a bond, that it's not just what the Romans made them do, but that they actually hold Arthur in high regard. So I actually kind of like that dynamic, and that didn't really bother me in the breakdown of the myth, really. And actually it made Arthur feel more heroic. It made me actually feel that the knights had a real love for him that's not just based on he pulled a sword, so he's amazing, for me it gave Arthur a little more substance. So I actually did like that in this version, that deconstruction.
I mean, I should clarify that I'm not complaining that there was a thing removed from the story or something to that effect by itself. Mm-hmm. When I saw Troy in theaters, I was in Italy with my classical studies group, and I had people who were like, well, that's not how it actually happened in the real story. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We're talking about a myth. It's okay to make
right.
deviations to that all. I'm not worried that one particular thing was cut out. I just mean that none of the Arthurian legends really being represented, aside from the basics. It feels like an adaptation of The Sword and the Stone, and then someone not familiar with anything more beyond just a quick Google search for references to put in there, without actually again having the story be sort of an adaptation of it all. And that could theoretically be fine. It's just then what they insert to sort of replace it is also logically difficult to really make work. Why is there a Roman estate beyond the wall?
Good question.
Yeah. That's the thing that is the second act of the movie doesn't make sense.
Well, and also the Roman guy is just such a jerk.
Yes. Oh, they are cartoonishly bad. Did you all find it really funny that they put very heavy Italian accents on all the characters who are supposed to be Roman?
Absolutely. Yes. I thought it was cartoonishly hilarious.
But then, yeah, also super evil.
Yeah. I also at the end was just wait, so he's gonna marry her, they're going to have a child, and then that child is probably going to like have to fight again, like be roped into this like continuous, I don't know, they're like prisoners until a certain age. Like I just wanted them to like rise up against that at the end. Like we fight for a cause, but then like they don't say what cause it is, and you're like, oh, are they gonna just escape this cycle that's been going for years and years with we have to fight for Rome where, you know, until we're free. And we didn't see that. And I was like, oh man, that would have been cool.
Yeah, I think that at the end, they're fighting for a cause that is, we are fighting to prevent the Saxons from coming into England. But the problem is, we're all very familiar with the term Anglo-Saxon, which means that, like, they lose. Like, they lose hard.
Yeah, and I think that at the end, they're fighting for Britain. So they're no longer fighting for Rome. And I think they say that. They're fighting for Britain. But he does also say that it is a family tradition to die on the battlefield. So I think no matter what, he was expecting his child to die. I actually thought for a moment at the end that, like, they were just going to kill all of them. Like, I just thought, like, on the battlefield, like, I just thought everyone was going to die. And it was like, oh, well, the Saxons win. Because I know that the Saxons win. So I thought, like, when Lancelot died, that Arthur was fighting him, I thought for sure Arthur was going to die, too. And it was like, oh, maybe no one liked it because at the end, everyone dies. And it's like, oh, well, you're King Arthur's no one. Saxons for life. And I thought that that was going to be the end of the movie.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the Saxons, because it's the big thread of this movie. And like, I generally speaking, the knights, I like the casting. There's some weird stuff that we'll talk about, but like, I generally like the actors, and like how they like vibe with each other is all pretty good. Like, I really like seeing them like interact. Having them go on a suicide mission is like kind of a fun second act thing, even though it doesn't make a lick of sense. And then like the choices he makes once he's on the suicide mission are even weirder. But the Saxons as this overwhelming threat. So again, the term Anglo-Saxon is extremely familiar to all of us because, you know, there's a lot of baggage associated with that, and it's difficult not to be aware of that concept. And then in this movie, we've got this whole thing where it's like, don't interbreed, like don't have a, you know, like don't touch their women, like don't muddy our pure Saxon blood. And I'm like, that is explicitly not how they operate.
Yeah.
And then they just become like this boogeyman. Again, like I'm comparing them with like the White Walkers, the others from Game of Thrones, and it is just this like very strange like parallel where they feel like this force of nature coming down and attacking villages, which again, also north of the wall, it seems that there are plenty of villages that seem just normal. There's a lot of people north of the wall that just seem like normal British people or normal like Roman citizen style that they like present in this world. The geography is a little bit weird on that one.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Stellan Skarsgård, who is a pretty famous actor doing a portrayal of sort of a monstrous kind of figure. I don't know. Like, what did you guys think of him as like a main villain?
I mean, he always makes a great villain, like every time.
Yeah, I watched this back to back with Dune 2, by the way. So, like, talk about amazing.
Yeah, right? Like, I saw Dune 2 in theaters, too. That was amazing. And he's great in that. I just think it comes down to, like, the Saxons being, like, this archetype of, like, they're bad. Like, we're hit over the top of the head that they're bad. Just, like, as a group in the story in general, how it's done.
Yeah, they're basically the cookie cutter invaders. They're invaders. And that is what it is. I think that, like, Skarsgård did as much as he could with what was given to him. I just don't think that in the script there was like, I think when villains go wrong, and I think we see this a lot in the films that we talk about, is like a lot of times you don't understand their complete motivation, right? So like, other than like invading and destroying, we don't know why the Saxons want this land other than like, well, bad people want land. They like to burn villages. That's like very difficult to kind of just feel like the villain is more than just an encroaching monster, right? Because like really great villains always have a real drive, right? They're after something specific, or like the best villains want revenge, or they're after some sort of temple, or they have a love that they want to bring back from the dead or something like that, right? And so you don't really get that with the Saxons at all. They are there and they seem like a tribe of people who are really just bent on destruction. It doesn't even really feel like they're going to do anything after they go through and burn the place, because you can't rape because we don't want to mix bloodlines. We're not really pillaging. We never see them take any gold or any ore or anything else. And that's what we usually think of invaders, right? So they're like literally there just to be a destructive force. And so I think that they fall flat because as the audience member, other than you know that they are there. So his son mentions a campaign, and he mentions going after this Roman family to ransom them from Rome for payment that could basically supply their entire campaign. But they never really say what that campaign is or what they're doing. And listen, like feeding an army, that's expensive for sure. Yeah. But we don't really know anything else. You know what I mean? Like, and so it makes them just bad. They're basically kidnappers in this movie. Very destructive kidnappers, now that I think about it. Because they're there to, like, kidnap the Roman family and then extort the Pope.
Right, yeah.
Because that's it. Like, that is, like, they're Ocean's 11, but, like, they're burning stuff to the ground.
Which, would make sense if they had an established we hate the Pope situation.
Right.
Like, frankly, like, if they were coming to rape and pillage, that would make more sense. But, like, the fact that we want them to be even more evil, we just want to kill them. We don't even want them to have, like, sexual assault as, like, a motivation for them, makes them even, like, less realistic characters.
Yeah, it's really odd.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you said it exactly right. Like, the acting is amazing, but you can only do so much with the story that you have, and we don't have a backstory on them.
Like, Skarsgård he's intimidating, which he's very good at, we know, because we've seen him in other things. He's very good in this movie at being intimidating. He's good at keeping his son at bay. There's actually, like, a very distinct relationship between father and son, even in the limited amount of information given into the script. Like, you can tell that this is a very domineering father. This is a son who, if given the chance, would probably take his dad out. So those dynamics are there. The acting is there. It's just not in the script. Like, there's not more for them to do.
Right. And it's unfortunate because they are set up to be like, oh, here's the common enemy that the Woads and the Romans are going to come together about. So having them be this big bad is good from the perspective of like, well, we need to have that for the story beat to make sense. But they just feel like a force of nature. And it's unfortunate because they are also interesting actors and we spend a lot of time with them. Like if we never were really like with them beyond like very like limited flashes, they could be this ominous force out in the distance. But like the movie actually has quite a bit of screen time for Stellan Skarsgård because he's a huge name. Like he's
right.
Like on Wikipedia, he's third billed before the person who's doing all the voiceovers for everything in this movie. All right, so let's flip around and let's talk about the voiceovers and then also the actual knights themselves. So first off, I hate that we open with this like text crawl, or not even crawl, just like text block of like, by the way, we've figured out who the real King Arthur is. It's this guy. And like having to have like that block of text. And then, and I'm going to butcher this name, Ioan Gruffudd?
I think it's Ioan Griffith.
Ioan
I
Griffith.
Think so, yeah.
So I know it's a Welsh name. Like, I'm so sorry about this. Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four movies. He plays Lancelot in this movie. He does the voiceover at the beginning, which completely unnecessary. Like, feels like such an editorial note of like, oh yeah, we're requiring you to put this in because people aren't going to understand. There's too much text up front, both between the actual text and then like the voiceover stuff. I don't think we needed that voiceover. It kind of muddies who's the main character in this movie. I think that like having any kind of focus on Lancelot is a bad choice for a bunch of reasons. One is that he's the Lancer. He's not the hero. And we're not really in his head for the whole movie. Like, it'd be one thing if we like had more voiceovers throughout, something about his perspective, something about him informing us, but we don't. It's really just there at the beginning to set this whole thing up. And I think the scenes that we had of him like being taken away from his family would have been way more interesting if they didn't explain it. And like, we had to like pick it up from context clues. I also really don't like that the knights are all just these boys that get sent over. I would have loved some scenes that like show why they're good as boys, like if they're already so well trained and so forth. Like we see him ride on a horse, and it would have been nice if his dad just like showed him some more pointers about riding on horses. But it's weird that all the knights are just like, here's this like squad that we sent over to England from Russia, or Iran really, that are just going to be here, and they're all going to be these distinct characters that, you know, because like the Arthurian knights, they all have like their own separate origins. Like it's more like an Avengers style thing, or like a Jason and the Argonauts type story, than even something like Beowulf, where like, here's the knights in my company kind of thing. Like each one of them has like their story for like why they ride with Arthur.
Right.
You know, it's a Magnificent Seven type thing. Which, structurally speaking, would have been great for this movie, because like it's basically ending with a siege of their castle.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? That might actually become my pitch now. Like I'm saying it out loud. That actually...
I heard it as it was coming out. I was like, oh, we're in pitch territory now, because Case is about to change this.
That I think might have taken that. So I like the actors. I like the idea that they're Russians. You know, they say Sarmatians, but they keep on saying Rus, because the Rus tribe that eventually would become, between all the different intermarrying and so forth, become the Russians. I don't mind that idea. I like the idea of, you know, the Iranian equestrians. There's this whole story about like horses like being brought over to Europe, you know, from the Middle East and from Asia, and like those kinds of peoples being like really interesting to the Romans. Like all perfectly fine ideas. I actually want less of them when they're young. Like I only want to see Lancelot. I don't want to see the other boys, so that each one could have their own story. Because right now it's a squad of teenagers that all get taken at the same time, and there used to be more of them, but a bunch have died. The ones we get, I like. And like, fuck, man, the round table, like that actual like room is such a wonderful set piece. Like the table itself looks great, and we get not nearly enough of it. Like there's just only a couple of scenes around the round table. It's so good. Like that round table, like, is such a good set piece. It feels like a great reimagining in a realistic way of like the round table, but it has like this Roman vibe to it all. Great.
Yeah.
I want these guys to be like hanging out, actually like feeling like the, I don't know, the Justice League that they are by the end of it all. Like,
I hear what you're saying. I think we had enough round table. It was beautiful, but I don't think this movie would have been helped by them sitting at it any more than anything else they did.
I think a strategy meeting would have been nice later in the movie. But, you know, in terms of the actors, I find it strange that they all have like the exact names from Arthurian legend. Like the fact that we have Artorias, and then they like go out of their way to be like Artorias, Arthur, you know, who we're talking about here. Like every time they say Artorias, Arthur, do this. Like, you know, they keep on going that way.
Well, just in case any of us get confused in the audience.
Yeah. But all of the knights have names from Arthurian legend, but it's weird that they do. For like one thing, Lancelot is a French name, and is also a character that was introduced to the legend after the Norman invasion, because it's a French part of the story. And that's why there's like the weird like romance situation with Guinevere, because it's two different stories that are being intermingled with each other. And I did see a lot of people at the time complain about like where those deviations are occurring. And if you're like, oh, this is our actual story of King Arthur from a realistic perspective, it is weird when you have the stuff that like we know for a fact came from other sources being like mingled into it all. I also get that Lancelot is without a doubt the knight that everyone can name besides Arthur in King Arthur's court without having to like try.
Right. Even people who are not like super into the myth of it, everyone kind of knows the name of Lancelot.
So I kind of wish that they had bastardized the names and made them like kind of Russian sounding, rather than just going with like straightforward the name. Did either of you see The Northman?
No.
I did not get to, no.
With a Skarsgård, Alexander Skarsgård in the lead role, but it's Hamlet. But it's going full on in the Danish names. So everything is like super Danified for it. So all the characters have their equivalents to Hamlet, but it's going with like, well, this is the Amleth kind of original story kind of thing. Or likewise, 13th Warrior, all the characters in there have like much more like Old English versions of the names than what actually appear in the Beowulf story, or I guess more either Swedish or possibly Danish. And I think just having that like a small layer of abstraction between like the character names, like either everyone has their names exactly right or they don't. And if you're going to like lean into the Artorias part, like I would rather lean into everyone else being like just a little bit different, because why not? Especially since the characters are only nods to the existing characters from the Arthurian lore, as opposed to being like perfect representations of it.
Yeah, it could offer like an interesting twist just to not be such a nod towards the original names.
Yeah, I think you could have fun with that as well.
And then you can kind of like go into some of the variations and have it not be so weird. Like Dagonet, Ray Stevenson's character, he is not a major character in the Arthurian lore. they buff him up a lot in this part. And it's like, oh, cool, that's fun. And it's Ray Stevenson. I always am here for Ray Stevenson. Like, he's great. It's so sad that he passed away. So I'm happy to have him in this movie. He's playing the exact part that I expect him to play, which is the badass dad role, as opposed to the badass father of bastards, which is Ray Winstone. It's really funny that the two Rays are the two bald big guys that are on the team. He plays Boars. But Dag is like the one who's going to be like your surrogate father who finds an orphan and takes care of him and is like, will die nobly and so forth. Like, that's what I expect for Ray Stevenson. Like, that's the kind of part he's going to play.
And I love those parts too. Like when we got little glimpses into their lives too, like I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like either they're all so different, you know, and they each have all these different perspectives, but they like have this shared trauma together that bonds them, you know, even though they have such different outlooks on life, they're still bonded together. And I liked that. I liked those little snippets into their lives. That was cool. And yes, it seemed fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Boars as this like father of so many bastards, like I adored that. Like,
love that. That was great.
And the way the team like joked about it and he joked back about it. And it was just like, but he like, at the end he was like, you know, I really love those bastards. I would take them with me.
Right. Especially number 3. He's a good fighter.
And then Lancelot was like, that one's mine. And everyone started laughing.
Yeah, those moments where they're like riding together had like good camaraderie. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very like Lord of the Rings around the fire, like kind of feel to it. Just my favorite part, actually.
Yeah.
We got Mads Mikkelsen popping up pretty early in his career.
Yeah.
As their scout.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
He was my favorite because he had a falcon and it was my favorite.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the 13th Ward comparison, he's the most like the scout character on that crew, like to the point where like the clothing is very similar, which kind of makes sense. Like he's the ranger of the group, but it's just like fascinating being like, oh, he would become so much bigger as an actor. Like so many of the characters in this, like, oh, their careers are going to go in some interesting places after this. Like Keira Knightley, who we should probably segue over to. This is not a complaint about Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley actually very much complained about this movie at the time because in all the promotional material for it, they increased the size of her bust.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So if you look at the posters, and it's not like a ton because she is like wafer thin as a person. So it was like a wafer with a bump as opposed to like just a wafer, but they like aggressively like do so at all the posters for it. She's very young in this. Like she's like 14 years younger than Clive Owen at this point. He's like almost 40 when he shot this movie, and she is like 20. It's weird from that perspective, but on the other hand, you know, it's not weird in Hollywood to do that. It's also wouldn't have been that weird in the real world in the 3rd or 4th century for that to happen. I think she's fine as Guinevere. I like the detail of her being like rescued and being a woad and being a fighter. It does feel very cliche that she's the archer of the group.
Yeah. But I don't know if we would have believed her in any other fight class. I mean, like, listen, I decided to look up some of the reviews just to like, you know, after I had watched it. And a lot of people were incredibly unkind to her in the review. And a lot of it was very critical of her body and how thin she was. And they honestly did not even believe that she could be an archer. So I think like it would have hurt even more if they had tried to get her to swing a sword, because especially in the time, in the day and age, that was already like her just being an archer garnered so much backlash. Like one review I read was like, this waif of a person probably couldn't even pick up a bow. So yeah, I mean, like, I understand what you're saying, like, oh, woman, distance, range, things like that. But I, you know, in terms of to minimize whatever backlash would be there, I feel like it's probably the better option.
Yeah, it just seems cliche is really the only thing that like bothers me. And in the last battle, she's like rushing in with 2 short swords, so it's not like she's like purely the archer in the team. It's just like I said, it just feels like kind of cliche. But hearing that, it does like rankle my feathers because I'm like, no, but she's like fine in this movie. Like there's like, I don't get the hate.
She got a lot of hate. Critics were not kind about this film in general. And I think part of it is, right, that it is King Arthur and people have a certain expectation for King Arthur's stories. But she took a big brunt of it. And part of it was because of the poster with her final battle scene outfit. that's just basically a strap, and the increasing of her bust on the posters and her complaining about it. And people were just really, really cruel about her in a lot of the reviews. And I don't think that she did, like, a terrible job. I actually think that, like, it was interesting that they kind of, I felt like there was a weird kind of, like, a mixing of what would be, like, a Guinevere, a woad warrior, and, like, a little bit of, like, a Morgana kind of thing, right? Because she's kind of there to also champion the woads and bring Arthur to this realization of, like, kind of seducing him into being like, you must fight for, like, our cause, like a united people of this land kind of cause thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't mind it at all, but some of the reviews did have a problem with, like, kind of seeing Guinevere in a more, I don't know, proactive role rather than just kind of someone who, like, Arthur had won the heart of, or, like, Lancelot had, which is kind of crazy because she does cheat on her husband, right? Like, I don't know. It's a little weird. It's like this weird thing that was happening on the reviews in the online world. But I thought Kira was fine. I thought she was fine. You can tell she's very young. You can tell that Clive is older than her. But she seems sure of herself. She actually looks pretty decent in all of the battle scenes. I mean, I think this is after Pirates, though, right? So she's already kind of swashbuckled once.
Yeah, and this is a Jerry Bruckheimer-produced movie also.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that for what it's worth and for what the movie is, she's fine. And by this time, she has let go of that kind of bad habit she had with, like, always showing her teeth that drove me crazy and Bend It Like Beckham, even though I really liked her in that. I don't, she's just, like, kind of, like, just show her bottom and top teeth in a weird way. But she stopped doing that by this movie, and so it was fine. She was fine.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the Morgan Le Fay kind of comparison. Like, that is, I think, the biggest thing that I feel like could have been, like, teased or played with in this movie, and it would have been really interesting if they just, like, said fuck it to Guinevere as a character, and we're just like, she's Morgan Le Fay, and just leaned into it and didn't say that it's like it's Arthur's half sister, but, like, let it, like, kind of linger. That is, frankly, for me, like, the big, like, Arthur story that, like, is worth, like, talking about, which is, like, Arthur, after the pulling of the sword, Arthur being seduced by his half-sister, breeding Mordred, and then having, his nemesis be his own son. That could have been played around with in this sort of setting. They talk about how he's half-Briton, and you could have done something with that. I don't know where you would have fit it in necessarily, so it's not like hard pitch territory. But like I said, if Keira Knightley was just Morgan Le Fay, or just Morgan or Morgana, or however you want to, like, make it, like, oh, historically, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
You could have had that be, like, a lingering thing out there, and then everyone in the audience who's, like, aware, being like, oh, I know what's going to happen when they have a kid. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good, guys.
Which honestly would have made more sense because we know eventually the Saxons will come back and take over. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest failings of this film is, like, the heroic speeches. They were so popular at this time. Those kind of fell flat in this film.
All of the speeches about freedom fell flat for me. For one thing, it's a movie about, like, a character who's going to become king, talking about how every man is free.
Right. It doesn't make sense. He's going to be the once and future king.
Right.
He's a king of legend, and he's talking about equality. It's not that he's bringing real freedom. It's weird to be like, the Romans are leaving, so we're getting rid of them, and we're going to get rid of the Saxons, but don't worry. I, your leader, your one leader, will bring you freedom for everyone.
Right. Like, I get that there is a stance of, like, well, England was never as feudal as, like, France or Germany or, the Holy Roman Empire. A lot of the sort of, like, old concepts of, like, the vassal states and fiefdoms and so forth, like, a lot of that is mainland Europe in a way that, like, the Anglo-Saxon controlled, like, Old English era of England is not egalitarian, but, like, it was a little bit more so than after the Norman conquest, when, like, much more traditional kind of, at that point, European, like, nobility structures was, like, imposed. And I get that England has this whole thing about the Magna Carta and being, like, a constitutional monarchy and having a lot of that. Doesn't make sense for this period, like, at all. for anyone involved. And this movie has a big chip on its shoulder when it comes to, like, the church.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was a practicing Catholic when I saw this movie, and I'm much more agnostic nowadays. So like, it's interesting where I was watching it then and like kind of fine with being like, well, yeah, but some of them are monsters and bastards. And like, Roman Catholicism has a lot of bad shit associated with it, especially when it comes to like purging out different people's points of view about how Catholicism should work. So the Pelagius arc I think is totally fine, except it's weird where it's just like he was just talking about how people are free and that's why we have to kill them. And then like the Roman estate, again, north of the wall, everyone's listening to this guy for some fucking reason I don't understand, where they're just like torturing people and like locking them up to die and so forth. Like, that's pretty extreme. So much so that they care about doing it like when they're on their way out. Seems pretty nuts. And then it's kind of just there for Arthur to be like, oh, you've gone too far. We have to balance our faith with the faiths of the people and have freedom of religion for everyone, as well as every man is born free. And it just feels very like rah, like kind of rah America, which is weird in a movie about the King of England.
Well, it's kind of rah like Church of England. I mean,
a little bit too. Yeah,
it is definitely like you Catholics are evil.
We Anglicans.
Right, like when there's that whole walled up house thing, right? Which I don't know how he knows that people are in there. I guess he just assumes. Maybe I missed it, but he's like,
well, he notices that they keep on like walling it up while they're like trying to pack up.
Okay, because he's like, we must get in there. We have to get in there, and he like gets in there, and it's like horrible, and we're all like, I get like, yeah, it's horrible, but it gives you this feeling of like, it's set up for us to say, wow, look at King Arthur. He is calling attention to the fact that this is terrible. It feels like very set up. I just wondered if they could have maybe not done with that scene or maybe did the story differently there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's like almost a point of comedy by the end of it all, with like the two monks or priests or whatever that religious fanatics, like where they're in there ready to like sit out their days until like they starve to death or whatever. Right. Then Arthur like breaks down the wall, pulls them out, pulls out the victims, puts them back in, re-bricks them up. Then the Saxons show up, takes them out, then puts them back in there at the end of it all,
and then burns the house.
Well, burns the house,
them aside of it.
Presumably, yes, but like,
because that's what the Saxons do. They just light everything on fire.
Yeah, when they take that estate was pretty nice. Like that, like just make that your base of operations at that point.
That's not what they're about. They're about total destruction. Remember, they don't have any goals.
Right,
yeah,
I know.
What do they like? What is their goal? Yeah, I wanted to see
honestly,
that.
Setting that estate makes no sense because they were going there specifically to kidnap these people to ransom the Pope for them, right? Mm-hmm. But like those people ran, and you know they left stuff behind because they're Roman, and there's no way they could have packed up all of their crap into the wagons, which means like they probably could finance whatever their said campaign is from the stuff in the house alone.
Right.
So like, why would you burn it down?
Yeah, it's also like a very nice Italian villa. Everything when they're like showing Roman is such shorthand for like okay, so like there's this whole thing about how like in movies we always show Rome as if it was like during the time of Julius Caesar, which is very much true in this movie. And so even though this is like 5th, 6th century, something like, I keep sliding it down, but like, or we'll say even though this is like 5th century, everything is shown as like Republican Rome as we can get it. The villa looks like what you see in the Italian countryside that were like built in the 1st century BC or the 1st century AD. And like their armors are all this way. They all have the Italian accents. It's almost like Italian occupiers of Britain that the Woads were fighting, and now the Saxons have shown up, and now the Woads have a chance at freedom, or however you want to get into all that. But yeah, the choices made to have them be so cartoonishly evil themselves, and also be living north of the wall, which is just weird, creates this whole situation where like Arthur does the dumbest shit ever in the name of just like espousing freedom, when he's like, every one of you has been free your entire lives, blah, 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 blah. And then he like walls him back up. I'm like, just fucking like shut the door. Like you don't need to wall him up. Like you're wasting so much goddamn time when you're on the run.
I thought that. I was like, whoa, you don't have time. What are you doing? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that the whole going into this prison, it is like specifically the only thing you really get is an adorable child and Keira Knightley. Like,
Right.
that is what that is set up. And honestly, you probably could have introduced both of those characters any other way.
Yeah, like have them stumble across the party. I mean, even having them there isn't the end of the world. It's the fact that after he like frees them, he wastes so much goddamn time afterwards and like just gives a bunch of speeches.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was just like, if you're gonna wall them, like, you know, wall them up, why don't you just like kill them or set them free or spit on them and keep going? Like, it's just like, the Saxons are coming anyway. They're gonna die if they stay.
Yeah. Why even leave them to be informants? Like, just fucking kill them. Like, if you're that disgusted by them, like, execute them for being horrible people. Because that's what you're doing by, like, locking them up.
You're just doing it the long way, wasting time.
It's slavery with extra steps.
It is, yeah.
That's what you thought. He was giving them their wish, though. You know, like, oh, well, fine, we'll put you back where we found you. But it just feels really
Put them in the
vindictive.
cages. Put them in the cages. Shut the door. Like, he says, wall them up. Again, it's the choice of words because we don't see the action. So, like, who knows if they actually do. But, like, everything feels like they don't have nearly enough time to do anything. And then he takes more time to waste on this all. And like I said, it becomes comedic at the end when the Saxons show up and then put them back in there again. This time with more fire. I will say, though, this then segues into them having what is a pretty good action scene and a good explanation of how they're able to deal with, like, the superior numbers that's chasing them, which is, like, the ice field. I actually rather like it.
I love the ice field. Yes.
I love the archery used to, like, try to keep them together to get the weight heavier on it. I think that's pretty cool. It's a good dramatic sacrifice by Ray Stevenson. Good stuff there. It's really funny when it's just like, they're outside of the range of our archers, and it's just like, we're going to show you that we're better archers.
Right.
Which also, I was like, is that like an English longbow thing? Like, are they also trying to, like, is this all?
It could be.
Again,
it honestly could be. It really did feel like, at some point, English propaganda, this film.
Right. Like, we the English, like, we have a constitutional monarchy, so we are more free than any other monarchy. It's not an autocratic state. We also are Anglican as opposed to Catholic, because the Catholics, they go too far, but we don't go too far with our religion. We don't behead women for marriage purposes.
Only when we first started the church. Only then.
Thousands of years later. And we've got the best archers.
But, you know, King Arthur would have never done that with the Church of England.
Right.
Just
Fun fact about the English longbow. So when it became a popular weapon of the English military, it was actually so important that people developed the arm strength to use the longbow, because it's really hard, that other games were banned. So archery contests became like the de facto thing at like bars and stuff, because like that was the only like game that they were allowed to do, because they had to like strengthen their arms to do it. It was just like, no, you should be practicing your bow all the time, which is wild to think about. Like, oh, well, instead of darts, what about handguns?
Yeah.
right.
So anyway, so we get the icing, which is actually really cool. Then they come back and they bring Alecto back to the bishop, and they're now free men, yada, yada, yada. Everyone's told to leave because the Romans are pulling out and the Saxons are coming. And Arthur's like, I'm going to stay. And he gets them all. I like when everyone shows up in their full armor. I actually dig the look of the different styles. Like, Arthur has this very Roman design to the armor that he wears, and the rest of them have this very like Russian design to it. I keep saying Russian instead of Russian because language, fuck off. But yeah, like I dig the different kind of styles for it. I find that the strategies are kind of weak in terms of how they win against this, unending force of Saxons. If the woads are so numerous that they're able to do anything, like, it feels weird that like they even need Arthur. Like, really, they just need like a good base or a good like plan. And as a result, I kind of feel like the third act, like the second act doesn't need to happen, and then the third act is too fast. Like, now that I have this idea of like, well, what if it was Seven Samurai or Magnificent Seven style? The siege of Hadrian's Wall should have been way more of the movie. Because as it is, it's the final battle, but it's like kind of an uninteresting battle by itself.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you cut out most of that building the wall back up and speeches about freedom, you could do that. You could afford to do that without affecting the runtime too badly.
Yeah, and this is a movie that had a director's cut. So it had stuff that they wanted to put in there. Like, Pelagius actually shows up as opposed to just being referenced a lot, but he's only in the director's cut.
Huh. Interesting.
In flashback,
Oh, yeah, because I was like, wait, isn't he dead? How did he get there?
Right. It's not like he just all of a sudden appears. It would be great if he was their Merlin.
They didn't murder me. I ran away. I'm here to join Britain and create a new church, the Church of England.
So We should probably take a second to mention Merlin, who in this is reimagined as being a leader of the Woads, as opposed, like they say, oh, he's a dark magician, but we see nothing that really corresponds to it.
Right. It's just more like he's got tricks in the woods. Like he can really manipulate you through the woods, and people kind of see him as a dark wizard and ghostly because of that.
Yeah.
But it's probably because of guerrilla warfare. Because it's what the Woads seem to be good at.
Yeah. Speaking of Game of Thrones connections, so this is Stephen Delane, who was Stannis Baratheon. Who I did not realize that until I looked up the casting, because full beard and long hair just does not look like this balding knight character from a totally different series.
Right. And he's mostly blue. And shot also in a lot of shadow. So.
There were several spots where he was sitting with his war council, and I could not track which one was Merlin. Because they're all just dirty men with big beards.
Yeah. It's still more light than the last fight scene in season 8 of Game of Thrones, so...
That's true. I could see slightly better. They all look the same, but I could actually see them. I do wish that there was something to kind of set up more of like the magic part of it, or like to keep the reputation part of it. I guess what I'm getting at is because Act 2 is kind of an inconsequential like side mission for them, and then they come back and deal with the main thing. I would have rather spent more time with the Woads to see them. Like, we spend a ton of time with the Saxons, but I would have loved to see more of a sense of like why the Woads are so scary and why they would be huge allies for this force.
I think you only get a piece of that when Arthur's men are in the woods on their way to go save the family, and it's like the really cool scene with all the shooting of the vines out and kind of like trapping them and kind of leading them through the forest the way that the Woads would like them to go.
I love that,
with very aggressive means. But I do think that that's kind of cool, and that can be like at night seem like magic, and that's not necessarily a problem. Like, you know, like I thought like that was a really cool scene, and I actually thought that would come more into play in the final battle against the Saxons. But I do think that like at the end of the day, it is kind of like you only get a taste of it and just not enough.
Yes.
Really.
Yes,
you know?
I totally agree. I think they were trying to give you a sense of the magic, right? But we don't see that at all, which is interesting because they don't kill them, right? They're like, you know, direct them here where we want them to go in the forest, but they don't end up killing them. I just wanted to see a little more with why they wanted to partner up. I kind of was a little lost there and wanting more with that.
It's done like verbally, but you don't really... like a tell and not a show in any way. You know, it's like the Saxons are here, so now we have to team up. And it's just kind of like, cool. Yeah, all right. You know, and Arthur walks away from that. Like, he never actually says to Merlin, you got yourself a deal, bub. Like, he walks away because the Roman in camp, who's a jackass, decides to hurt the kid, which, I mean, I don't know, because he's religiously fanatic and he needs to kill the kid because he should have died for God because he's pagan. I'm not even sure why he grabbed that kid.
Right.
Like, these people are here to get you out of your situation, and then you take a hostage.
Yeah.
I don't like. I didn't like. I was like, where are we going with this?
Why?
Like, why are you
is
taking
he
a hostage?
So hostile about the pagans while they're running for their lives? Like, it's the whole thing about like the Catholic Church makes no sense in this movie.
Right. And then basically like that's when like they run back and then Keira Knightley shows up to shoot him and like, oh well, I guess we have a truce now because she shot a guy. I don't know. Like, it doesn't.
She
like,
shot the guy he's supposed to be protecting.
Right. Like, it's like, what?
Yeah, I was very confused by that. Also, there's like no ramifications from that at all. It's just kind of like,
right.
Oh,
the
well.
son's fine with it. The son's like, oh yeah, my dad lost his way, which is like, sure, like, you know, a very emotionally like mature perspective, but at the same time, like, also not realistic.
Right.
Like,
yeah. The son was like, my dad was a dick. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for shooting him.
I hated that. I was like, I mean, my God, you know, I get that he was a jerk, but yeah, I don't know. I'd be pretty pissed.
I mean, like, and it was like really funny because, of course, Arthur's the better person. So he, like, rides up to the window. He's like, I'm really sorry for your loss. Like, I'm really sorry my future wife who murdered your dad.
Oh, yeah. And I also like, there's no feeling of like, shit. Like, we were supposed to be protecting this family and like, now he's dead. Like, this could be bad for us. Like, there's none of that. They're just like, nah, it'll be cool. No problem.
Yeah. Like, if the son had been pissed off about it, they would have been killed when they got back to the wall.
Right. Well, and also, like, the bishop isn't upset about it at all either. Like,
so we all agree that the dad was a dick.
I know that the son was, like, priority, right? But, like
protect this family, but if the dad
priority.
dies, it's fine. Like,
he's not the favorite of the Pope, so it's cool. So no problem.
Well, but let's like actually explore that logic though, because like sure, Electo is supposed to be the favorite of the Pope, okay, or like the favored godson of the Pope, which implies that his dad or at least his family has like strong connections to the Pope already. Like, and they are given up. He's like, oh, Rome gave us this like chunk of land north of the wall, which is like cool, beyond our protection. Like you go live in the frontier, surrounded by.
Which like makes me think that the Pope didn't really like him. But go on.
They didn't have walls at that goddamn villa. Like, what the fuck? Like, they're north of like Roman defenses, and it's just like, oh, here's our space. So, but you would think that like the dad would, as a result, be like well connected and like kind of liked by them, or at the very least, like, you know, have like family connections that sort of require them to like put up with them. Again, it's just weird that like there's nothing that happens because the dad dies.
Right.
Well, and like none of those other soldiers like said anything, because like, okay, like Arthur's men, they're not going to say anything. And, like, probably the people traveling with them, like, the servants and shit, like, he seemed like a dick. So, like, they're not going to say anything. But his soldiers were totally down with trying to kidnap the kid at his order. And they're not going to go back and just be like, you know, aside from the fact that, yes, a lot of Roman soldiers at this time were also slaves and they really honestly didn't care. Maybe that's the fall of the Roman Empire. But that's not the point. The point is he had soldiers and they said nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like such a weird like moment. I was like, so like no one's in trouble because like he was told when he like basically when he told the kid's father, the Roman, to like get his stuff and just move, like when and he kind of freed all the slaves and all that stuff and did all the things, like the Roman was like, when you get back, you're gonna be court-martialed, you're gonna pay for this, right? So he like did feel like he had authority to like threaten Arthur's like role within Rome, but like then he died and I guess no one cared.
Right. Everyone was like, all right, we'll just all have the same backstory that this like guy got shot or eaten by like a bear or something along the way. Everyone just had the same backstory, I guess. And it was like, cool.
Yeah, he fell down a cliff. He was trying to take a piss and I don't know.
Right.
It's like, so we have an easy out, which is we just say it was the Saxons. No. We all agree he violently shit himself to death. Okay, yeah. So we're all agreed violently shit. Okay, yeah. That's the way to go. Yeah. Okay. I think so. We've sort of summarized this whole movie at this point because we were talking about like goods and bads, and the whole movie is like this whole. One thing I do want to like bring up: color correction on this movie. So the cinematography itself is pretty good. Like, there's a lot of like jib work. There's probably some helicopter shots in there. A lot of things look really good in this movie, but the color correction looks like ass. The shade of green that they use for like any sort of natural effect, like grass, is like the sickly shade of green. Like the color correction on everyone, like just like looks a little off. There's like some kind of filter going on. And I get it. It's 2004. In the wake of The Matrix being successful, we're like coming right off of A Brother Where Art Thou in terms of like, oh shit, we can do color correction and do a lot of digital stuff. And we're right before we get into the wave of everything being like teal and orange. So I understand why the color is bad, but it's bad. It's really bad.
It's a lot of green.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels very drab. And it makes what is already a movie with not a lot of depth in it feel really, really dour. Like, it just feels bleh, right? Because, like, the color is just so, ugh. I think they're trying to make it feel, like, gritty or realistic, and it just makes it look boring.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because realistic wouldn't have been a bad choice for this movie. It just, it's not really that realistic. It just, like, it looks like you crank the hue and the saturations in, like, some weird ways. Long story short, while the movie is shot well, it ends up not looking that great. Like, it's fine. I would say overall this movie is like not a good movie, but it's like I'm not mad that I watched it once. I am mad I watched it twice.
I think if it's like something that's on TV and you leave it on while you're like folding laundry and shit, like it's perfectly fine. Like this is not necessarily a bad movie. Like if this was a movie that back in the 80s Channel 11 had bought to play over and over like every Saturday for a month, I probably would have put it on a couple of times. I would have changed the channel a couple of times, but like while I was cleaning or doing something, it'd be fine. It'd be fine.
Yeah.
Again, it just has so much potential, like the actors are fucking amazing, right? It's just like the story, man. I just wanted to see it go a different way or,
go away, go some direction.
or it just didn't add up. So yeah, I mean, was I mad that I watched it? No. Would I watch it again? No.
Yeah. So good rental, not a great buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for a good enough looking movie with good actors doing cool scenes. There's always going to be a space for that in movies. And like, there's a couple cool scenes in this one. There's not enough for the runtime, but there's a couple cool scenes in this one. So like, yeah, it's fine, but it could have been better. So why don't we take a break? And when we come back, we are going to have some pitches for this movie. And until then, see you in a few.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. All right. So, Lauren, we're now in pitch territory. There's one rule and one guideline for how we approach the pitch section. So, the guideline is that we are trying to take it from the perspective of when this movie came out. So, like, understanding the circumstances, understanding the field of movies that were out there, understanding that, like, if an actor is going to go on to be big but isn't big yet, you can't be like, oh, his part should just be bigger as a result. Recasting is a thing, but we try to, like, go against it because there are reasons why you end up with the cast that you did. Trying to understand the logic for why this movie was made is why we play with this as opposed to just fully, like, script doctoring it. And then the other thing is that I am not allowed to go before Sam. So I can go in any spot besides first, basically, as long as Sam goes before me.
Trust me, it's for the best.
So, Lauren, you are our guest. We could do this collaboratively because I don't have like hard notes. Honestly, my pitch came together while we were talking. So we could do this like all collectively, but like I can't take the first swing at it. So if you want to take the first swing or have Sam take the first swing, that's up to you. You're our guest, so you can decide. I'm just not allowed to go before Sam.
Sam, do you want to lead the charge?
Sure, I will. Before I begin, although I did bring up a lot of good points while joking, I actually didn't like hate this film. So like my notes are kind of very simple. Like Case, I think that we have to choose between the placard card in the front, like the words, or the voiceover. And I'm okay with leaving like words like the placard card in, but I think we should get rid of the voiceover because I think it's actually really confusing that Lancelot is speaking because I thought this was going to be a movie from the perspective of Lancelot. So I would, as Case actually suggested earlier, I would actually just kind of have that moment of Lancelot getting taken, that kind of thing. I will add, I do like the thought of like having his name be one thing and maybe having the Romans change it. I'm fine with that, right? And just being like, have him have a different name and then have someone be like, your name's now Lancelot, get in the get in the cart.
Oh, like
kid.
An Ellis Island scene?
Yeah, like like from here on out, that's your name. Just to kind of give us like that feeling of total loss of identity. Because I think like what's implied in this movie is the knights all have this loss of identity, right? Because they're taken from their families by the Romans to kind of defend in this land that they don't know. And so I think it's fine to do it like that. I think it's fine to have them have like more athletic names when they're picked up and then like have the Romans just like rename them, like whoever's training them, like, no, that's too hard to say. Your new name is this. So kind of that way we can still have like a continuity with that stuff. I'm fine with them like growing up, and although I did like the cases, like we should give them individual like moments, I'm fine with how it transpires into the future, whatever. And I'm kind of okay that this is not fully 100% like the regular run of the mill, like one of the many stories told about King Arthur's court. I would absolutely, positively, if not cut down or cut out, I would cut down the Roman villa scene behind the wall. God, it's so stupid. I'm going to leave it in because I don't even know where else to go. I'm like, it's dumb. It's dumb because why would you go beyond the wall? But we're just going to leave it in. And we're going to let him see Keira Knightley, but we are going to cut out so much of that. She's just going to be working there kind of enslaved, and he is going to free her. But this is also a plant by the Woads, and as they are traveling back through, the Woads are actually going to help them in the woods kind of like thin the ranks. Because I want more of them. I need more of them. And this can happen before or after the ice scene, which has to stay. Absolutely must stay. Probably after, I think it's better. But I think that we need something to solidify these two teams coming together. And I think that the only way to really do that is after the ice scene, our lovely bad guys get back on track. Our White Walkers, I'm just going to call them White Walkers. Our White Walkers get back on track. And as they're heading towards the wall, they're carting their bodies and they're a little bit slower. And they think that they're actually done for, which actually adds more tension. And that's when the Woads come out and start doing exactly what they did to them when they first started their journey, except now they're doing it to our White Walkers and using their guerrilla warfare to kind of hold back and delay this. Because I think that we don't have a real reason other than like Guinevere's hot. And so now I'll consider her. And I'm so good and kind as Arthur. So I think like that's where I would basically just like, fine, you can do the rescue mission, if only because it gives you tension to getting back. But you have to cut out like the first conversation, do the ice scene, and forget about the fucking monks. I just find Keira Knightley on the grounds. That's it. Forget about the monks, forget about that stuff. Tell all the people to go free. You can still tell the Britons that are working for the Romans to go free without a speech of freedom. And then the ice scene, and then another mad dash through the forest where the Woads help and trap, and kind of then Arthur and he make peace. And then you get the final battle, which is a larger siege with some tied in guerrilla warfare, which I thought like the oiling of the ground was pretty cool. Like the prep stuff was cool. I like the prep scenes for that, so I would leave that in. But I would definitely have that happen. And then I'm fine with the running horses and blah, blah, blah. The knights will live on forever. That's fine. Okay. Anyone else?
Okay. I agree with a lot of that. It's like, I don't know that I mind the voiceover. I don't even mind that it's Lancelot. I think it's like different that way. But I think if it's going to be a Lancelot voiceover, we need it to be like, I'm giving my view about King Arthur and his background, because we get Lancelot's background and we don't get King Arthur's background.
Yeah.
We don't get like King Arthur and his family and all that's at stake for him. His family perish. You can keep the Lancelot narration, just make it more King Arthur focused, like up front. And then I kind of want to see more of the other knights. We get bits of that, but like we're supposed to get this feeling of like camaraderie and that they've been fighting together for all these years, but we don't see that. I'd like to see a little bit of that more. I would like to see more tension. Is it okay? Keira Knightley and that whole crew, the Woads, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I want to see more tension there, and then I want to see like why they're agreeing to work together with them, because it just kind of doesn't come together for me. It's not clear that they make this pact or why. I love what you said, the guerrilla warfare, and why their tactics against all of these numbers are going to defeat them, nevertheless, even though, they're outnumbered. That would be cool. There's not enough interaction with the Woads about why they pair up. The wall thing and building the wall and putting the people back in, like that could go.
Yeah. I mean, I think also to your effect, I mean, like if we had a moment, and I think this would give the Saxons more screen time if we had a moment where there was a run-in with Saxons and Woads.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
then we have a moment of like, oh shit, like, we're not safe. Because, like, at this time, right, like, Arthur is basically, like, he's part Briton, he's part Roman, but he's seen as a tool of the Romans. And the two of them have fought each other forever. And there are clearly people on the council for Merlin's, for the Woads, who don't agree with Merlin about Arthur. And so, like, there is a lot of wasted potential of possible political intrigue here, right? Because not everyone's going to be on board with what, but if they have a run-in with the Saxons, then people are more on board.
Yeah.
And then that gives you a little more, like, you
Yeah,
know?
I wanted to see, like, what was at stake for them? Are the Woads, like, worried about, you know, their survival? Have they been treated like shit in the past? Like, I wanted to see some more of that for sure. Would be great.
I feel like since mine isn't like a full pitch, let me throw out something that would actually like address issues that both of you had.
Okay.
Which is that what if instead of it being a Roman villa like that's north of the wall, what if the Woads, because we have them sneak south of the wall and making attacks, what if they capture this family and pull them north?
Oh.
And then it's a rescue mission. But it's a rescue
Good
mission
idea.
where they take prisoners, including Guinevere, if you want to do it that way, where we can set up that, like, no, they have this huge enemy in the form of the Woads. Which, by the way, the Woad part is in reference to the color of the dye. So it's supposed to be a nickname that they have in the movie. The Picts is what they're supposed to be from a historical perspective. But they're called the Woads in the movie. So have the Woads be a force that they have to contend with, that we actually see, like, it's not just that one fight at the beginning of the movie, like, that they consistently are at odds with. And, like, the first time that they actually come together at all is when the Woad prisoners that they have help fight the Saxons when the Saxons start catching up with them. So that way you can have sort of like that transition of the common enemy being the thing that brings them together.
Yeah.
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 And then that way you can occupy the first half of Act 2 with that as, like, you think that the main problem is this. And, like, you hear that there are Saxons in the north, but that is only something that they reference. And then the Saxons actually catch up to them. So we don't show them, like, arriving and so forth, unless you want to, like, do a shot of them attacking or something like that. We do not need to spend a lot of time with the Saxons early in the movie because it should be a misdirect that really, like, we're focusing on the bad guy that we're used to fighting, which is the Woads, and they are bad and they are rough and they are hard to deal with. And then it's like, oh, there's actually a bigger bad. They are worse. And it's like, actually, we can kind of see the humanity in both sides because now we're forced to, because there's this bigger bad coming our way.
Right.
And so that way you can segue from that. You still get the ice scene because that's when the Saxons catch up with them. That's where they actually start to make the alliance. And then you can get to Hadrian's Wall faster, and then bringing the Woads in and joining up with it can be sort of like one of the big tensions of this all. I realize that, like, this alliance is exactly what happens in Game of Thrones.
Because it is.
but that's because the story's already the same. Like, this movie is doing the exact same story, and I just think, you know, have some more tension there would be helpful. And then, like I said, third act should be more of the siege. But this way you get, like, the Woads being the big bad in the first half of the movie until we segue away.
Right. And, you know, you can still have kind of this Arthur, Guinevere, mutual respect thing / sexual tension, blah, blah, blah. But, like, it makes more sense. And you can do the prep scene and all of those things and an exchange of knowledge, which is always kind of fun, you know, setting up some traps, some booby traps. That's always fun. I love that in movies when people are like, no, like this. And it's like, oh.
Yeah. Like, we
that.
do guerrilla warfare. That's how we outbeat the numbers, you know? Like, yeah, that'd be cool.
Like, here are the spikes that came out. Because, like, some of the stuff in the scene where they're in the woods, like, heading towards the north, it's really cool. Like, it was very formidable. Like, barbed wired vines coming out, being shot by arrows, those picket wooden blocks, I don't remember what they're called, I know they have a real name, being, like, kind of shot up and kind of spooking the horses. Like, all of that stuff's really cool. And that's only happened with the Woads in, like, the woods. Other than that, the last battle is mostly, like, flaming arrows and, like, CGI fire pits all over the place.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't see more of their tricks being used against the Saxons. Like, I think you hit the nail on the head that, like, the second half of Act 2 should have been way more of them doing guerrilla hits on the Saxons and using the Woads that way. Or maybe the Woads are trying to fight the Saxons and losing, and so that way we get the alliance at the start of Act 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, now that I'm saying that part out loud, we should have seen like Merlin's forces try to deal with the Saxons separately.
Yeah.
Way more, and like have a little bit of effect, but like keep on pulling back and like keep on failing to defeat the Saxons, and the Saxon army being so large and powerful that they get pushed all the way to the wall.
It's interesting because it, like, I guess partially to keep the mystery, but they kind of just sit in the woods. And, like, someone brings a knife to him and he's like, oh, Saxons, okay, we're in really big trouble. Like, I don't know, like, he had the internet. Like, he knew what kind of people they would be. Like, well, if you Google them, they just burn everything to the ground and leave nothing behind. No boy.
I did my own research.
Exactly.
We really needed to establish that conflict and that the Saxons are such a big threat that Merlin can't deal with them.
Yeah.
That's not in this movie.
Right, because he's like supposedly magical too, right?
I mean, even if it was just tricks, I mean, like, you get a little bit of, like, a smoky effect that I assume is brought on by the Woads when, like, the Saxons first, like, kind of go beyond the wall. You know, like, they, like, get it, the first group that is just fodder. But they don't really show you. Like, I wish they had, like, kind of shown, like, you know, the smoke being made and, like, someone, like, fanning it out or something like that. Ooh, the mist, the Woads, they're scary, Marlin, magic, you know, like, just kind of like, if it's just, like, sleight of hand, that's fine, you know, and that adds to the legend. That would have been cool.
In fact, I feel like that's what they're trying to do here, and they need to do more of it.
Right? You don't really quite, it doesn't, I do think that audiences are smart enough, but sometimes I wish they'd show a little bit more in this movie specifically.
Yeah, this movie is unfortunately cut down a lot. And so even if they had some of those scenes, it's unfortunate that we don't have more of them in the final product, because like this is a King Arthur story that is being made in this sort of like more realistic kind of concept, or at least like a non-Celtic tradition kind of concept. But mysticism is stripped away on purpose. And I think that like, considering that this comes out in 2004, this is in the wake of the Lord of the Rings trilogy being, you know, a massive hit. And one of the things about the Lord of the Rings trilogy is that it is taking like English folklore and trying to sort of like replicate a lot of it. There's a lot of references to Arthurian legend in it and a lot of subversions of it, but where the world is more magical in that world. And then this is one where it's like, well, what if the world wasn't more magical, but it was still epic? And so I agree, having like sleight of hand, having the trickery, having the reputation of being a magician be Merlin's because he's so cunning and so creative. You know, it's like Aristotle, like where supposedly the Romans were afraid of him because he just was so goddamn smart and could like whip up something that could destroy them. Like have Merlin gain that kind of reputation, and then you're subverting the Arthurian legend very intentionally, as opposed to just sort of like hinting that like maybe it's not magic, maybe he's just clever.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wanted more of that. I just think things like that would be fun. Other than that, like, in the end battle, you're just making this other tribe kind of, like, fodder, right? Because, like, we've spent so much time just kind of watching this very small Roman legion, right? Because it's just Arthur and his knights for all these things. They're just like a Navy SEALs team. That's basically what they're like. They're specialists in some level. To defend this wall. And then, I mean, they do have men, I suppose, like they have villages, but it just feels like the Woads are doing all the heavy lifting and they're just doing regular battle, which didn't really feel like what they had been doing previously. They had been jumping out at carts. They had been kind of ambushing. I wanted to see more tricksy. I just wanted to have more fun with it. Even if it's more realistic, it should be more fun.
Like I said, it's disappointing that it is such like a straight battle at the end, because then it's like, well, what is the benefit of Arthur? Because like a small cavalry of like 7 people is not enough to like make a huge difference in a war. And so it's nice that they're good soldiers, but like they're not making that much of a difference, which means that the Woads are doing most of the work in that battle. And like as a result, like if they're doing most of the work and it's just a straightforward battle, weren't they already kind of going to win? Or at least weren't they in a good position to win before we got to the final battle? Like it seems to be more of 2 even sides facing each other as opposed to an underdog really coming through.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're all kind of in agreement here. Like, if this was a bit more like a Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven kind of end, like have the second half of the second act and then all of Act 3 be much more about the siege of Hadrian's Wall, I think that would have allowed for us to spend some more time in the cool set pieces that they built. We could have had a cool, like, scene where Merlin comes in and they actually strategize at the round table. and get more of that.
The round table.
If nothing else, so that we can have a scene of them like discussing strategy there. It's too good of a table for how little we see it.
Yeah.
I'm normally not being like, man, the furniture in that movie is really good, but it's a really good looking fucking round table. I'm really happy with that one. And this is a thing that I don't think you could actually do because the director's cut is bloodier. I think this movie needed to be more realistic in terms of the violence. I think that the fact that it is so tame, and again, I think that at the time, this part's not really plausible. The movie logic of the early 2000s was PG-13 was where it was at. They weren't really pushing for R-rated movies, but this movie really needed to have that degree of violence because it's trying to subvert the much more fairy tale-esque form of the classic Arthurian legend. So we need it to be grimy and dirty and sad and violent. I'm not saying that violence is always the answer, but in this particular one, it would have been.
I think you're right on that. Honestly, though, some more tricksiness would have done for me.
I think like a little bit more blood when actual fights occur.
Maybe a spike going through a foot.
Yeah, especially if the heroes had to deal with some more of it, where it's just like, oh yeah, like bad stuff happens on the battlefield, regardless of if you're the good guy or the bad guy. A little bit more of just like, yeah, sometimes there's just unfortunateness to the world that you're in, and it doesn't distinguish based on if you're the protagonist or antagonist of the movie.
I mean, I actually think that, like, in this movie, the one thing that they did do is that they made sure that some of the good guys did die, which is, like, I was actually, like, kind of surprised because the rest of the movie has no teeth.
Right.
So it was, like, a very, like, distinct choice to make. Like, literally, like, they killed off, like, 3 of Arthur's men by the end of the movie, which was, like, more than I expected. I definitely expected Ray. Once he made the bond with the child, I was like, oh, he's gonna die. But, like, right? It's just so, especially for that era, like, it was like, oh, no, he loved something. He showed affection. He's gonna go. But, like, I was actually surprised that I was like, oh, okay. Like, wow, they killed off Mads. They killed off Lancelot. Like, wow, that was real. That really happened. Because the rest of the movie is so, like, stormtroopers shooting around. Like, it's just like, the bad guys fell, but first of all, you only really know 2 of the bad guys, and everyone else that falls, you don't really care about. I'm actually going to give them credit. They killed off 2 of the main knights. Good for you, movie. Should have been a little more harsh in the battle scenes, I think.
I did want to see more guerrilla warfare. I really like, there was such an opportunity for that. We don't get to see it, and I just wanted to see it.
Especially because I think that if you have an invading force, this is King Arthur, it's not strictly historical, you should always try to employ the Home Alone method. I think.
I love that, the Home Alone. It's so much fun, though, to watch, too, you know? Like,
right.
Traps. We like traps.
Yeah.
We do.
I love traps.
We love it.
We love a montage where they set up traps and then we see the traps happen.
I mean, like, that's one of the things that I, like, loved in the 13th Warrior, too, right? But, like, here you have the Saxons. They don't know this land. We don't know why they're here. But they don't know this land. They don't know anything. But the truth is that Arthur, his knights, and the Woads, they know a lot about this land. And so, like, they should use it. They should use this land. And it's fine. It's fine if people, like if people make the argument, like, oh, well, guerrilla warfare, blah, 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 Europe, blah, blah. It doesn't matter because the Saxons will win anyway. And, like, this knowledge will be gone. So, like, let it happen. Let us have fun. Let us have fun. Set some traps.
Dune, where they hide in the sand, right? And they have that, like, straw that they breathe through.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up if we didn't reference it. Dune 2 is very good for guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
If anyone has any doubts about seeing that movie, like, yeah, I should see the first one first. But because there are so many words in that series that you will not understand. But it's very good at having these, like, surprise traps. I was thinking about that a lot when I was watching, especially the Woad ambush at the beginning of the movie. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's like Dune.
Yeah.
Then we don't get more of it. And that's what this movie really needed.
I couldn't agree more.
Either Home Alone or Dune 2. That's what this movie needed.
Well, I mean, like, when you really get down to it, isn't Home Alone just an adaptation of Dune Part 2?
I mean, when you get down to it, isn't everything?
Isn't there that great scene where Macaulay Culkin just stares at the camera and goes, the spice must flow?
100%. And then he tells him to leave the pizza on the counter.
And there's that great line from Paul Atreides, keep the change, you filthy animal.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we're kind of just like all in agreement here, which is that the movie could have used a little bit more violence, but definitely needed more traps. And honestly, the whole like subplot of like, well, we have to go to this like Roman villa up north could have been like a way to explore the relationship between Arthur and the Woads a lot more than what we got. And I think we're all kind of like okay with one of the bits of opening stuff, if it was the text block or the narration. If it was the narration, I feel like we should have gotten a little bit more, and I would have rather spent more time in Lancelot's head as opposed to kind of just jumping into the modern movie so quickly. I wish that the knights weren't all established as being like these teenage boys that are riding off, you know, just show Lancelot and just allow the others to have an air of mystery about like what their backgrounds are. But I think we're kind of all in agreement, like a little more guerrilla warfare, some more traps, have the siege matter a bit more, have some more sequences about it, not just like one big battle at the end. Would have been really nice.
Yeah.
And don't have like such straw Catholics and straw Saxons. Like in both scenarios, they're like just needlessly evil for the sake of being evil. And it would have been nice to at least like have them be a little bit more relatable and believable in your movie that's supposed to be the more relatable, believable King Arthur.
Yeah, more backstory there would have been good so that I could, you know, connect.
I mean, what do you mean? I'm a Roman Catholic. I put people and pizza in the same oven. I don't know.
Oh my God. I was like, where are you going? The same.
I don't know. I was aborting it halfway through and I was like, it's too late.
Yeah, but they definitely are like playing into some Italian stereotypes in this movie.
It's so bad. It's so bad though. Like it's so bad. Like listen, people listening, you never ever ever have to watch this movie, but his accent is so thick for no reason, and he hates everybody. And like when they're like, "We have to leave," and he's like, "No, this is my house. I'm not leaving." Like at all.
Like how annoying was that too? It was like, oh my God, dude, like you have to leave. Like I wish the story was different, that he was like, oh yeah, I guess I'm gonna die if I don't leave. I get it, right? Like
Right.
Like he was gonna ask to speak to the manager
Right.
for sure.
yeah.
God. Did you know there's a video game based on this movie?
No, I did not know
Yeah.
that.
You know what, that kind of makes sense though, because some of the battles felt very
Yeah,
turn-based.
it's one of those like PS2 era, so it's like a God of War clone, kind of like the Lord of the Rings one that came out around
wow.
this time.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just, oh man, okay, I will say this. If you listen to this episode and you haven't seen the movie yet, and again, I'm always confused when we get to this point in the episode, but if you haven't seen this movie, I would say watch 13th Warrior first, because it's doing a lot of the same things and doing it a lot better. I think that this one is fine, and if you're just looking for a thing to throw on that's like enjoyable, cool. I wouldn't buy it. I would rent it. That is my final assessment of this movie.
Yeah, and if you can find it for free, do that
Yeah,
too.
that's even better, because there are scenes that you'll enjoy, and then there's a lot of spots that you'll just scratch your head. But I think we're all kind of like in agreement on how this movie could have been stronger and a little bit better. And Lauren, you are a guest. Do you have anything else you want to say about it?
Again, actors are amazing. So much potential there. I think we're all in agreement about where the story could have been different, and the movie could have looked a lot differently from that. So yeah.
Yeah. Good cast.
Oh
Good
yeah.
cinematography, just bad color correction and not really a story in this one. It's just,
Story could have been different.
yeah, I don't mind stripping away stuff from the legend. It's just they didn't like insert new stuff to replace it. They also could have hinted at Arthur having a half sister. That I would have appreciated, just to have a hint. If you're going to hint at everything else, like hint there as well. Well, Lauren, thank you for coming on and thank you for bringing this movie. Where can people find you and follow you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Instagram, Lauren Carter 9273. Definitely enjoyed being on the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Sam, where can people find you and follow you?
They can find me on our Discord when I occasionally remember it. And other than that, they can't find me anywhere, because I will be locking myself, building a wall, locking myself on the inside, having someone build the wall on the outside for my attempted humor with that Italian bit. And so, no, they will not be able to access me. They will only be able to complain to Case at...
Well, you can find me on most at-based platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on to my AIM screen name from high school for dear life. So you can find me there at Quetzalcoatl5, because I was pretentious even then. Also, you can find this show and all the other great shows on the Certain POV network at certainpov.com. We've got a ton of great shows. You can also find a link to our Discord server at certainpov.com. It's an open invite. Come hang out. It's a really good vibe there. There are a lot of Discord servers that are either too dead or too busy, and I find that we're kind of like in a good space of like there's usually a couple notifications, there's constant chats going on, but like it's not the type of Discord server where if you leave for 5 minutes, you will never figure out who responded to you because you'd have to keep scrolling.
Thank gosh, because I often come in and very late on conversations.
But you can actually follow the conversation, which is a really nice part. And there are conversations, and I'm really happy with a lot of the feedback that we've been getting. There have been some new faces around there, so check that out. On that note, you should also check out our YouTube channel, Certain POV Media, where there are now full episodes of this show and Men of Steel up there, as well as all the clips that we've been doing and the Superman analog series. So check out that. We've got some crazy high view counts on some of those podcast episodes now that I'm scared because like I know what our numbers are and it's a lot more. So it's impressive. Check that out. It's been fun coming up with ways to do visualizers that make it visually interesting to look at a podcast episode as a video without at the same time having the entire thing be video camera stuff, because we don't do that. So check all that out, then come back here for the next episode. Sam, what have we got coming up next?
Well, next time, we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Elisea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Jeff Moonen. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.